My wife threw the ring at me after I cut off her daughter's allowance. "You'll die alone, bitter and broke," she spat. I looked her in the eye and said, "Better that than dead inside with people who only love my wallet." What happened next shocked everyone. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Arnold Wilson from Ohio. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I used to think that being needed was the same thing as being loved. That when someone depended on you, it meant they valued you. It took me too long, decades, really, to realize there's a thin line between love and convenience, and I'd let myself become a very comfortable convenience. My name's Alan, and I'm a 53-year-old man who used to work in finance, managing other people's wealth while slowly watching my own emotional bank account hit zero. I wasn't always bitter. I wasn't even angry at first. Just tired of buying affection, of earning a place at a table I was supposedly invited to, of showing up every day for a family that treated my presence like background noise unless I was pulling out my wallet. When I met Monica, I was freshly divorced and convinced that love was supposed to be complicated. She had this fire to her, fast-talking, always laughing, the kind of woman who could light up a room and drain your energy at the same time. I mistook that spark for sincerity. Tessa was 9 when we met, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel something paternal the first time she clung to my leg and called me Al Man because she couldn't pronounce my name. I was smitten with both of them. A ready-made family. I told myself I was lucky. I thought I'd been handed a second chance. We moved in together after a year. Got married the next. I paid for the house, the school tuition, the braces, the ballet lessons. I watched Tessa grow up, went to every recital and conference like I was her real father, even though the word dad was always just out of reach. At the time, it didn't matter. I told myself love was a verb. You do it, and maybe eventually you earn it back. But the years started to chip at me. Slowly, quietly, like water wearing down stone. It began with little things. Tessa rolling her eyes whenever I asked about her grades. Monica brushing off my concerns when the credit card bill doubled in 1 month. I became the family accountant and the emotional punching bag. Every time I brought up budgeting, Monica would sigh and call me controlling. Every time I questioned another $1,000 emergency, I was told I didn't understand what it meant to be a parent. I paid for Tessa's first car, and she crashed it within 6 months. I covered her college tuition, and she switched majors 3 times, eventually dropping out to find herself in Los Angeles. Every failure was met with a request for more time, more money, more patience. I gave it. God help me. I kept giving it, thinking if I stopped, they'd stop needing me altogether. And then who would I be? The breaking point came on a Thursday, 2 days after my birthday. I'd worked late, missed dinner, and came home to find Monica and Tessa laughing on the couch with shopping bags around them like trophies. I opened the bank app on my phone and stared at a $3,200 charge from a boutique in Beverly Hills. It was just a purse, Tessa said, not even looking up. You make that in a week. Monica smiled like I was being dramatic. Don't start, Alan. She's going through a rough time. That was their favorite line. She's going through something. She's under pressure. She's figuring it out. But I was never allowed the same grace. I dropped my keys on the table, steadied my voice, and said, the allowance ends this month. I'll cover essentials, rent, food, but I'm not paying for luxuries anymore. Silence. Monica's face tightened. Tessa scoffed like I'd told her the Wi-Fi was down. You're punishing me for being your daughter, she said, finally using the word she only pulled out when it suited her. No, I said, staring at both of them. I'm just done paying to be tolerated. That night, Monica didn't sleep in the bed. Around midnight, she stomped into the room, holding her wedding ring between her fingers like it was radioactive. She threw it at the dresser, and it bounced, then clattered to the floor. You'll die alone, bitter and broke, she spat, her voice cutting through the dark like a blade. I sat up slowly, the sheets tangled around my waist. I looked her in the eye and said the first honest thing I'd said in months. Better that than dead inside with people who only love my wallet. She blinked, caught off guard. Then she turned and walked out. I didn't follow her. I didn't even move. I just stared at the ring on the floor, gleaming like a tiny handcuff. The next morning, I packed a suitcase. 2 dress shirts, a couple of t-shirts, jeans, underwear, passport. No plan, no speech. I opened my laptop and typed in one-way ticket and then paused. Thailand had always fascinated me. The colors, the food, the language I didn't speak. It was the furthest place I could imagine from the life I'd built. I clicked the purchase button before I could talk myself out of it. I sent an email to my boss asking for an extended leave and left the ring on the kitchen counter, next to a note that simply said, "I'm not your ATM. I'm not her father. I'm done pretending." It felt surreal walking out that door with no one chasing after me. No one even texting. Not that day. Not the next. The silence was confirmation. I hadn't walked out on a family. I'd finally walked out on a transaction. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel poor for leaving. I felt rich with relief. I spent my last 2 days in the house moving around like a ghost, half present, half somewhere else already. Monica didn't speak to me, and Tessa had apparently vanished into her own world, probably soaking up the last of the apartment I'd been paying for. I didn't bother asking where she went. For years I had pretended not to notice her disappearances, the hangovers, the mysterious weekend trips I always footed the bill for. Now, I wasn't pretending anymore. I moved through each room and took only what I needed. No souvenirs, no keepsakes. Every photo frame I picked up felt hollow. There we were on the beach in Cabo, smiling like actors in a commercial. There was Tessa at graduation, clutching her diploma, Monica on one side and me on the other. Except I had paid for the school, the cap, the photographer, and still couldn't recall her saying thanks. I thought about taking the photos with me. But what would I do with them? Frame reminders of all the ways I'd been tolerated but never truly loved? It was the silence that struck me the most. No argument. No dramatic last-minute plea. Monica didn't throw things, or beg, or scream. That would have meant she still cared. Instead, she kept to her room, scrolling on her phone, occasionally stepping into the kitchen to microwave something before disappearing again. That indifference cut sharper than any fight could have. On the second night, she finally said something. I was sipping tea at the dining table, scrolling through cheap apartment listings in Chiang Mai. Monica walked in, arms crossed, wearing that silk robe I'd bought her last Christmas. "You're really doing this?" she asked, her voice flat. "You're running away." I looked up at her, exhausted. "No, Monica. I'm stepping away. There's a difference." She narrowed her eyes. "You're going to regret this." I didn't answer. Regret, to me, would have been staying another year, another month, another second pretending I was anything more than a debit card with a heartbeat. She didn't ask where I was going. That was the part that stuck with me. If the roles had been reversed, I would have asked. I would have cared. But Monica didn't want to know. Knowing would make it real. And if it was real, then she might have to ask herself why. Instead, she just scoffed, muttered something under her breath, and walked away. I heard the bedroom door shut, then the soft click of it locking behind her. That night, I slept on the couch, like I had so many times before, only this time, it was by choice. And for once, the cushions didn't feel like punishment. They felt like permission. The morning of my flight, I left quietly. I didn't slam doors or leave a tear-stained note. Just my keys on the counter and the air of finality in the way I shut the front door. The Uber ride to LAX was uneventful, the driver chatty while I stared out the window, numb. It wasn't until I was through security, standing in line for a black coffee, that I allowed myself to feel anything. Not anger, not sadness, just release. Like I'd finally exhaled after years of holding my breath. My phone buzzed. I looked down, Monica. A text. "Don't expect to come back. We're done." I stared at the screen for a long time, then deleted the message without replying. There was nothing to come back to. That wasn't my home anymore. I wasn't hers. Maybe I never really was. The flight was long, and somewhere over the Pacific, I replayed every moment of the last few years like a mental movie on loop. The missed birthdays, the cold shoulders, the "just get it for her" comments that followed every spoiled request Tessa made. I remembered the Christmas where I gave Monica a gold necklace, and she barely looked at it before saying, Did you keep the receipt? I remembered the Thanksgiving where Tessa told a table full of friends that I wasn't her real dad, but paid like one. And still I stayed. I stayed because I thought loyalty would be enough. That if I kept giving, maybe one day they'd stop taking long enough to see me. Not just my income, not just my reliability, but me. The man who woke up early to scrape ice off Monica's windshield. The man who stayed up late editing Tessa's college essays. But love, real love, doesn't require interest. It doesn't run on conditions. And I was tired of being the only one trying. When I landed in Bangkok, it was nearly midnight. The air was thick with humidity, the streets buzzing with life even at that hour. Neon signs lit up the sky, tuk-tuks zipped by like mechanical insects, and I stood on the curb with my one suitcase, feeling both terrified and liberated. I didn't speak the language. I didn't know a soul. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was afraid of going back to the known, where I was invisible, where love had price tags, where my presence was expected but never appreciated. A cab driver smiled at me and pointed to his trunk. I climbed in, gave him the name of a modest hotel I'd Googled the week before, and leaned back into the cracked leather seat. Outside, the world moved fast. Inside, I felt slow but steady, like a man who had finally stopped running in circles. That first night in Thailand, I didn't cry. I didn't drink myself to sleep or call anyone back home. I lay in a twin bed in a budget hotel room, listening to the city hum through the window, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Not happiness, not yet, but the peace that comes from knowing you've finally stopped betraying yourself just to keep others comfortable. I stared at the ceiling and whispered to the dark, "You did it." And for once, I believed it. I'd love to say the first few weeks in Thailand were some romantic awakening. Me eating mango sticky rice on rooftops and finding my inner peace between yoga sessions. But the truth was far less glamorous. I was alone, confused, and sweating through every shirt I owned. The jet lag hit me like a truck. The language barrier was a wall I kept walking straight into. I'd walk into a convenience store, try to buy a bottle of water, and leave red-faced because I didn't understand what the cashier was asking me. I started using hand gestures and learning a few phrases, but every interaction reminded me of how out of place I was. Still, even in those disorienting days, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. It was raw and messy, but it was mine. There were no expectations here. No one wanted anything from me but my patience and presence. It was a humbling relief to not be anyone's provider for once. I found the English teaching gig through a Canadian expat named Greg who ran a small language center in Chiang Mai. He interviewed me over coffee at a plastic table outside a street food stall. "You've never taught before?" he asked, eyeing my resume with mild amusement. I shook my head, honest. "But I've worked with people my whole life. Managed teams. Trained staff. I've got the patience of a saint." Greg grinned. "That's good. You'll need it with our kids." And just like that, I had a job. The pay was modest, barely enough to live on by American standards. But for once, my money wasn't bleeding out faster than I could earn it. I rented a studio apartment with peeling paint and a view of the alley, and it felt more like home than the 4-bedroom house I'd walked out of. The kids changed everything. They were noisy, chaotic, sweet little messes, running up to me every morning with stickers and broken English. "Teacher Allen, Teacher Allen," they'd yell, dragging me toward lopsided art projects and paper airplanes they insisted were dragons. Their affection was unfiltered and immediate. No one cared what I earned or what I could give. They just liked that I showed up. They liked that I listened. That first week, a shy little girl named Molly drew me with a giant head and tiny arms. She handed it to me with a serious look and said, "You are my papa now." I nearly cried right there at the desk. I held it together, smiled, and said, "I'm honored." But inside, something cracked wide open. It was like all those years of forced fatherhood had built up this ache I never acknowledged. And here was this little girl, offering love with no strings attached. Just because I was kind. Just because I was there. By week 3, I had a routine. Wake up to the sound of motorbikes zipping down the street. Grab a coffee and pork bun from the vendor across the alley. Walk 15 minutes to the school, dodging stray cats and uneven sidewalks. I'd spend the day teaching basic grammar, playing games, grading messy handwriting, and laughing more than I ever had in the corporate world. After school, I'd linger in the courtyard, letting the kids show me dances they'd made up or teach me Thai words I kept mispronouncing. The sun would start to set, and I'd walk home alone, but it didn't feel like loneliness anymore. It felt like quiet, like recovery. My phone was still mostly silent. A few texts from old coworkers asking where I'd gone. One email from my bank. But Monica? Nothing. Not a single word since her last text at the airport. And I was okay with that. Or at least, I was trying to be. Then came the voicemail. I was sitting at a small outdoor bar with Greg and a couple of other expats. We were drinking cold beer, swapping stories about visa chaos and favorite noodle stalls, when my phone buzzed. A missed call from a number I didn't recognize. Then a voicemail notification. I slipped away from the table, stepped into the dark alley beside the bar, and played it. It was Lisa, an old friend of Monica's. We hadn't spoken in over a year. Alan, her voice crackled through the static. I don't know if this is still your number, but I thought you should know. Monica and Tessa, things are bad. Like, real bad. They burned through everything. Maxed out the cards. Condo's gone. I think they're staying with someone in Santa Clarita, but it's temporary. Just figured you'd want to know. Sorry. Click. I stood there in the dark, phone in my hand, my heart sinking into some weird place between anger and guilt. Part of me wanted to care. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated. Another part, the softer one I rarely let speak, just felt sad. Not for them exactly, but for the whole damn mess. For the years wasted pretending we were something we weren't. For the energy I gave and the silence I got in return. I walked back to the bar and didn't say a word about the call. I just picked up my drink and smiled through the rest of the night. But inside, something had shifted. They were gone, really gone now. I hadn't just walked away. I'd outlived the version of me who stayed. Later that night, Greg noticed I was quiet and pulled me aside. Everything all right? He asked. I nodded, but I guess it wasn't convincing. He leaned against the railing beside me. You know, he said, most of us came here running from something. Bad divorce, worse job, existential dread, pick a card. I chuckled, grateful for the honesty. Yeah, I said. I guess I thought I was running towards something. But maybe I just needed space to breathe. Greg nodded. That's the same thing, man. Just depends on how you tell the story. And with that, he clinked his bottle against mine and went back inside, leaving me alone with the stars and the buzz of a city that didn't ask me to be anything but present. I didn't sleep that night. The voicemail kept looping in my head, like a broken record I couldn't shut off. Monica and Tessa, broke. Homeless, maybe. That's what Lisa had said, right? Things are bad. Like, real bad. I sat on the balcony of my small apartment, shirtless in the humid night air, watching the city glow in the distance. In the street below, someone was playing music, something soft and old, but I couldn't focus on it. I kept picturing Monica on someone's couch, her pride cracked and splintered, her manicured hands clutching a cold coffee in a stranger's kitchen. I imagined Tessa scrolling through Instagram, pretending nothing was wrong, while quietly wondering where her next latte was coming from. And I hated myself for how satisfying that image was. There it was, vindication. They'd hit the bottom I'd been propping them up from for years. And yet, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Like winning a race you never wanted to run in the first place. The next morning, I opened my laptop and logged into the joint bank account I'd long since emptied but never officially closed. Just curiosity, I told myself. Just closure. But seeing the overdraft numbers hit me like a slap. Thousands in debt. Credit cards maxed. A bounced payment to a luxury salon Monica used to visit twice a month. I stared at the screen, half in disbelief, half not surprised at all. I remembered how she used to laugh off budgeting talks. You make good money, Alan. Why are you so obsessed with saving? I used to tell her it wasn't about saving. It was about stability. About not being one bad month away from collapse. But she never heard that part. To her, caution sounded like control. And now, it seemed, she was learning the difference the hard way. Against my better judgment, I opened Facebook. I hadn't checked it since I left, but curiosity has a sharp edge. Monica's profile was still public. Her last post was a filtered selfie from 3 weeks ago, captioned, New Beginnings. The comments were full of friends hyping her up. You got this, girl. Fresh start vibes. It was bizarre, like watching someone post from inside a burning house with a smile. But there were no new photos of Tessa. No tags, no check-ins. I clicked over to her page and found it deactivated. That hit harder than I expected. For all her attitude, Tessa had always lived online. If she'd gone dark, things must have been worse than Lisa let on. I closed the laptop and rubbed my face, exhausted by ghosts I thought I'd left behind. I wasn't responsible for them anymore. I knew that. But walking away from a mess doesn't mean it stops smelling. Sometimes it follows you, clinging to your skin. I told Greg about the voicemail a few days later. We were grabbing lunch after class, sticky rice and grilled chicken from a cart we both liked. I tried to play it off, casual, but I think he caught the weight behind my words. So now they're broke, I said between bites. Apparently sleeping on couches, begging friends to help. He nodded slowly, chewing. And how does that make you feel? I laughed, sharp and bitter. Like I should feel guilty. But mostly I just feel done. He took a sip of his soda and looked at me. You gave them a soft landing for years. They chose to never learn how to fall. That's not on you. I nodded, but his words didn't settle right away. I wanted to believe them. I did. But there was a part of me still tangled up in the idea that maybe, if I'd just been a little more patient, a little more forgiving, things wouldn't have ended like this. That maybe, deep down, I'd failed them. That was the most dangerous thought of all. A week later, I got an email. No subject line. Just, Monica, in the sender field. My stomach clenched. I stared at it for hours before opening it. It was short. I hope you're happy. You ruined everything. She's depressed. I've lost everything I had. You were supposed to be her father. How can you sleep at night? That was it. No hello. No hope you're well. Just blame, heavy and immediate, like she'd been saving it up just to hurl it like a grenade. I read it 3 times. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that would change her mind. In her world, I had failed them. I was the villain, the man who stopped giving, the man who walked away. But I knew the truth, and that had to be enough. That night, I sat with Eli, another teacher at the school. He was an ex-paramedic from New York with a sharp tongue and no patience for bullshit. I told him about the email, half expecting him to scold me for leaving them high and dry. Instead, he just lit a cigarette and said, "You know what they say, right? The longer you feed the fire, the more it thinks it needs you to survive." You stepped away. Now they're just cold. I stared at him, surprised. You don't think I should have done more? He shook his head. Man, sometimes the most generous thing you can do is let people crash. Not because you want to hurt them, but because they'll never grow with you cushioning the blow. His words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. After that, I stopped checking Facebook. I deleted the bank app. I archived Monica's email and added her address to the block list. I'd done my time. I'd given more than anyone had the right to ask. And now, it was my turn to heal. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but because there's only so long you can live with people who love the version of you that funds their life, but not the version that needs care in return. I hadn't left them. I'd chosen myself. And in doing so, I'd finally learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes, the best thing you can do for people who never saw your worth is to disappear and let them learn how to live without you. The school became my sanctuary, not because it was peaceful, God, no, but because it was loud in all the right ways. Kids shouting my name from across the dusty courtyard, tugging at my sleeves, dragging me into chaotic games of tag I didn't fully understand. It was messy and imperfect and honest. They didn't care about my past, what I owned, who I used to be. To them, I was just Teacher Allen, a tall, slightly awkward foreigner who always brought stickers and listened when they tried to form English sentences that collapsed halfway through. And that was enough. More than enough, actually. There was a boy named Chai, maybe 9 years old, who never spoke in full sentences. But every day, he sat in the front row, eyes wide, hands folded, waiting for class to start. One morning, he walked up to me and slipped a piece of paper into my hand. A drawing. Me, standing next to a scribbled sun, with "Thank you for smile" written underneath in shaky pencil. I stared at it for a full minute. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even grammatically correct. But I felt more seen in that moment than I had in the last 10 years of birthdays and anniversaries with Monica. No price tag. No hidden ask, just gratitude, pure and small. Teaching became more than just a job. It was a rhythm, a lifeline, something that tethered me to the present. I stopped waking up dreading the day. I stopped checking my phone for drama that might land in my inbox. I stopped trying to rewrite the past in my head every night before bed. And slowly, in the quiet space left behind by all that mental noise, I started rediscovering pieces of myself. I took long walks after school, let the sunsets wash over me like medicine. I learned how to order food properly in Thai, how to greet the elderly vendor on my corner with the right tone and bow. These were small victories, sure, but they felt earned. And for once, I wasn't achieving them for anyone else's praise. I was just living. Of course, the past didn't vanish. It had a way of showing up uninvited, like a bad smell you couldn't trace. Sometimes it hit when I least expected it. Like during a teacher's meeting when a colleague passed around photos of her daughter's graduation, beaming with pride. I smiled, congratulated her, but something in my chest twisted. Tessa never invited me to her graduation dinner. She said it would be weird with her friends. I remembered standing outside the restaurant, peeking in the window, watching her laugh with Monica and their friends, my name never even mentioned. I wasn't a dad that night. I was a sponsor, an afterthought, but it wasn't all grief. There was also Eli, blunt, sarcastic, and honest in a way that sometimes irritated me, but always made me think. We started meeting every Saturday morning at a cafe near the river. He'd bring a notebook full of cynical poems. I'd bring my silence. Eventually, we started talking about real things. Our pasts, our regrets, the parts of us we'd hidden away to survive. You know what your problem was? He said once, mid-sip of iced coffee. You thought being useful meant being loved. That if you just did enough, gave enough, they'd finally see you. I stared at him. Is that not how it works? He smirked. Not with people who only love the version of you that pays for dinner. That hit harder than I expected. I didn't respond right away, just stared at the water. He was right, of course. I had tried so hard to be indispensable that I forgot to be authentic. I thought if I made myself essential to their lifestyle, I'd be essential to their hearts too. But love built on utility is a transaction. And once the payments stop, so does the affection. It wasn't love I'd been buying. It was access. Access to proximity, to temporary inclusion, to the illusion of family. And now, sitting across from someone who'd made the same mistake in a different life, I saw it clearly. I had never been loved for me, just for what I could offer. At school, the children kept me grounded. Molly, my tiny shadow, started calling me Pa Teacher like it was a title. She'd hold my hand walking to lunch and tell me about her dream to be an artist, even though her drawings looked like exploded spaghetti. And I loved every single one. They decorated my apartment walls now, crayon chaos and hearts with my name in uneven letters. I'd catch myself smiling at them when I got home. And for the first time, those smiles weren't tinged with sadness. They were real. These kids didn't know what I used to be. They didn't care. They just liked that I showed up, that I cared back. One Friday, after a long day of lessons, the principal pulled me aside. You're making a real difference here, she said. They adore you. Some of these kids have never had a steady adult in their lives. I nodded, unsure what to say. I didn't feel like a savior. I felt like a man trying to fix his own broken parts by helping others feel whole. And maybe that's what made it work. I wasn't doing it for legacy or redemption. I was just present, consistent. Something I'd given so freely to Monica and Tessa for years and never received in return. That night, I took myself out to dinner. Alone. No phone scrolling. No distractions. Just a good meal and the warm buzz of a street vendor's cart. I watched the world pass by, the city alive with color and noise, and I realized something that hadn't quite hit me before. I wasn't waiting for anyone to show up. Not hoping for a text or dreading one. Not measuring my evening against anyone's expectations. I was alone, yes, but I wasn't lonely. There's a difference. One stings. The other? It heals. It's strange how quiet the world becomes when you stop trying to be heard by people who were never listening. That's what I thought one morning as I sat outside my apartment, sipping thick Thai coffee from a chipped mug while the city stirred to life around me. Birds darted between tangled power lines. Motorbikes growled down the narrow road. And across the alley, an old woman swept the pavement in gentle, steady strokes. There was no drama here. No emotional landmines waiting to be stepped on. Just rhythm. Just life. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I was bracing for something. I wasn't preparing for the next sarcastic jab, the next cold shoulder, the next financial ambush disguised as affection. I was just here, present, and that presence felt like the most valuable currency I'd ever owned. Monica never wrote again after that last bitter email. No apology, no follow-up, just silence. A younger version of me might have stared at his inbox waiting for a different ending. Might have composed a dozen unsent replies, crafted arguments in the shower, imagined one last confrontation that ended with closure or clarity, or hell, maybe even regret. But not this version of me. Not anymore. I didn't need her to explain why she'd chosen entitlement over partnership, or why Tessa had turned my support into an expectation rather than a gift. I didn't need them to see what they'd lost. The only thing I needed was the truth I already had. I had never been their family. I'd just been their foundation. And when I stopped holding up the structure, they blamed me for the collapse. There were moments when the ache crept in, like when I saw fathers with their daughters at the school, laughing over spilled juice boxes and paper crafts. I'd smile and nod, but something inside me twisted a little. I couldn't help but think of what could have been, not just with Tessa, but with the life I thought I was building. I had tried to give her everything. I showed up to every school event, defended her when teachers called, paid for tutoring, sat outside dance classes, and clapped like a fool at every recital. I wasn't her biological father, no, but I tried to be everything a father should be. And in the end, she saw me as a resource, not a relationship. That truth stung less now, but it still stung. Maybe it always would. And yet, life had filled in those spaces with something better. Not replacements, just something real. The children I taught gave back in tiny, powerful ways. Like the way Molly hugged me every day before lunch and whispered, "Thank you for being kind." Or the way Chai would hold his workbook up like a trophy when he finally spelled a word right, his eyes gleaming with pride. These weren't grand gestures. They weren't dramatic reconciliations or teary speeches. But they were honest, consistent, healing. Every time one of those kids looked at me with trust in their eyes, I felt the balance shift. Like the universe was quietly making up for all the thankless years. Not with flash or fireworks, just with presence, warmth, moments that mattered. I remember one specific afternoon, humid and loud, like most, but something about it felt different. The students had planned a surprise goodbye party for another teacher who was returning to the States. They danced, gave handmade cards, even pulled me into the circle to sway awkwardly to music I didn't recognize. At one point, a parent approached me, an older woman with deep smile lines and a face weathered by sun and time. In broken English, she said, "My son say he loves school because of you. You are like Papa to him. We thank you." And she placed her palms together in a Y, the traditional Thai gesture of respect. I did the same, but my throat tightened. I had to step outside for air. I stood in the corridor, hands on my knees, trying not to let the emotion take me down. I wasn't crying for her words. I was crying because I believed them. Because after all this time, I had finally become what I tried so hard to be in another life. A father figure who mattered. Not because of money, not because of obligation, but because I cared. I thought often about what peace really costs. Because it isn't free. It comes with mourning. With letting go of stories we told ourselves, that we were needed, that we were important to people who only valued what we provided. It comes with saying goodbye not just to people, but to versions of ourselves that we nurtured, protected, and eventually had to bury. The version of me that stayed quiet to keep the peace? Dead. The version of me that overextended, bent, and broke just to be loved? Gone. In their place stood someone I was still getting to know, quieter, more grounded, maybe a little lonelier, but certainly more whole. One night, Eli and I were sitting on the rooftop of his building, a couple beers between us, watching the skyline flicker in the warm haze. He looked at me and said, "You ever think about going back?" I shook my head. "There's nothing to go back to." He smiled. "Yeah, me neither. Funny how home can be the place that hurt you the most." I nodded. "Or the place where you finally stop hurting." We sat in silence after that. Comfortable. Uncomplicated. Two men who had escaped different fires, now warming themselves by a quieter flame. Now, as I write this, I realize I've built something new. Not a family in the traditional sense, but a circle of connection. Kids who greet me like I'm the sun returning each morning. Neighbors who wave when I walk past. A life that doesn't demand I earn love through sacrifice. It's quieter, smaller, but it's mine. And for the first time in a long time, I don't feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. I don't feel like I have to prove anything to anyone. So no, I don't miss Monica. I don't miss Tessa. I don't wonder if they miss me. If they do, they know where to find me. But they'd better come without expectations. Because I'm not the man who bought affection. I'm not the wallet with arms. I'm just Alan now. A teacher. A neighbor. A man who learned that peace isn't something you stumble into. It's something you choose, again and again, no matter how many times the world tries to pull you back into the chaos. If you've ever had to walk away from people who only valued what you gave, not who you were, this story is for you. Sometimes, peace comes at a price, but the freedom it gives you in return is worth everything. If this resonated with you, don't just scroll past. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life stories about choosing yourself, no matter the cost. Your story matters. Let's talk about it in the comments. See you soon in the next one.